Welcome to the NIA Safety Training course for the National Institute on Aging. We want you to get the most from this safety course and be able to access it on your terms. Audio levels may be adjusted or muted by clicking the speaker button in the taskbar. Click the button a second time to hide the volume controls. This course may be paused, rewound or forwarded at any time by using the controls in the taskbar. Closed captioning for this event is visible to the left of this presentation. It is located under the Notes tab of the sidebar. The table of contents is located on the Outline tab of the sidebar. You may click on a title to jump directly to that slide within the course. Click the Search tab to access the search feature. Enter any keywords, press Enter and you will be given a list of slides that discuss that topic. You may hide the sidebar at any time by clicking the icon located to the far right of the taskbar. To view the sidebar once more, click the icon a second time. At the beginning of each module, there will be a title page. This title page will have a navigation bar which has buttons that will let you jump to the different modules within the course. You may use this navigation bar, or the table of contents to move to any portion of the course at any time. At the end of the course, there will be a learning check of 10 questions. This course provides guidance on responsibilities regarding the fundamentals of safety surveillance and reporting in clinical research studies, funded by the National Institute on Aging. The following topics will be covered in this training course: Overview of Good Clinical Practice, Module 1, Human Subjects Protection, Module 2, Adverse Events and Unanticipated Problems, Module 3, Safety Monitoring Reporting Requirements, Module 4, Safety Monitoring and Oversight, DSMB and Safety Officers, Module 5, Regulatory Requirements and Responsibilities of Principal Investigators, Module 6, Data Safety Monitoring Plan, Module 7, NIH and NIA Policies and Responsibilities for NIA Staff. This box will be available on the title slide for each module. You may click on the buttons to jump to that specific module within the course. Overview of Good Clinical Practice. What is good clinical practice, otherwise known as GCP? GCP is the international ethical and scientific standard for all aspects of clinical research involving human participants. GCP provides guidance on all aspects of a study, including design, conduct, site performance, monitoring, auditing, recording, analyzing, and reporting. GCP compliance ensures the protection of rights, safety, well-being, and confidentiality of study participants. It also ensures data quality, integrity, and reliability as well as ethical conduct of clinical trials. Who requires training in GCP? Anyone directly involved in the design or conduct of research involving human participants. This includes investigators, medical monitors and study coordinators, support and backup staff, contractors, and subcontractors, and consultants, central laboratories, and reading centers. Study sponsors and institutional review boards are also required to be trained in GCP. Module 1, Human Subjects Protection. At the end of this module, individuals will be able to identify the differences between clinical research and clinical practice, and understand human subjects protection requirements, the importance of confidentiality in clinical trials, and the informed consent process. What is the difference between clinical practice and clinical research? With clinical practice, a clinician treats an individual patient using standard treatment strategies that are in his or her opinion to be best for the patient. With clinical research, as an investigator conducting a clinical trial, the clinician is obligated to follow the study protocol that describes how assessments and interventions must be administered to ensure consistency across all study sites and participants. Confidentiality must be protected by investigators as specified in the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, otherwise known as HIPAA. The HIPAA privacy rule protects all individually identifiable health information held, or transmitted, by covered entities, such as a hospital or academic research center. A certificate of confidentiality may be granted if the release of study data linked to a certain participant could have potentially negative consequences, either by design, or due to the nature of the disease, or condition, or could damage participants' financial standing, employability, insurability, or reputation. Informed consent. is a process by which an individual voluntarily confirms their willingness to participate in a clinical research study after having been informed of all aspects of the study that are relevant to the subject's decision to participate. Informed consent is an ongoing process that continues throughout the trial. Key aspects of informed consent is that an individual must be able to understand study risks and benefits, and must have the capacity to make reasonable decisions regarding voluntary participation. Individuals with an illness or disability may be unable to give informed consent but can still participate if their legal guardian is able to provide consent on their behalf. Informed consent must be timed so that consent is obtained before any study-related procedures such as scan or blood draw is performed. It may take place prior to screening if procedures additional to routine care determine eligibility. Some studies use separate informed consent forms for screening and enrollment if the individual is eligible. Other studies describe both the screening and study procedures in the same informed consent form. Informed consent is administered by a principal investigator or their designee. This person describes study purpose and procedures, explains risks and benefits, discloses potential conflicts of interest of the investigators and compensation they may receive for conducting the study, states that individuals will not be penalized for choosing not to participate in the study, explains that an individual may withdraw consent at any time before or after signing the consent form up to study completion, and encourages the individual to take the form home to discuss with relatives or friends. The informed consent form describes the purpose of the study, its procedures, the risks and benefits, voluntary participation, and the importance of complying with protocol requirements. The informed consent form has 9 required elements and 9 optional elements, per the Code of Federal Regulations. The informed consent form must begin with a concise and focused presentation of the key information that is most likely to assist a prospective participant or legally authorized representative in understanding the reasons why one might or might not want to participate in the research. This part of the informed consent form must be organized and presented in a way that facilitates comprehension. Information presented in the key information that satisfies a basic or additional informed consent element does not have to be repeated later in the form. The basic required elements of an informed consent form are the research statement, reasonably foreseeable risks or benefits to study participants or any other individuals, disclosure of alternative treatment options, the confidentiality statement, an explanation of medical treatment or compensation options if injury occurs for studies with more than minimal risk, contact information, the voluntary/no penalty statement for participation or withdrawal from the study and collection of identifiable private information or biospecimens. Additional elements are occasionally appropriate for the form. They would be a statement of currently unforeseeable risks, conditions for termination without consent, additional costs to the participants if applicable, consequences and procedures for withdrawal, a statement for informing participants of new findings during the course of the study that may affect willingness to participate, and the approximate number of participants in the study. Any storage and future plan for biospecimens and data should also be included. The following additional elements that should be included if applicable. A statement that the participants' biospecimens, even if identifiers are removed, may be used for commercial profit and whether the participant will or will not share in this commercial profit. A statement regarding whether clinically relevant research results, including individual research results, will be disclosed to participants, and if so, under what conditions. For research involving biospecimens, whether the research will, if known, or might include whole genome sequencing. For example, sequencing of a human germline or somatic specimen with the intent to generate the genome or exome sequence of that specimen. Once an individual agrees to participate and signs and dates the form, it is called the informed consent document. The participant receives a copy of the signed document. The original document is saved in the participant's folder by the study staff. Once this takes place, study activities can now proceed. The NIA Clinical Research Study Investigators Toolbox provides an informed consent template and informed consent checklist. Please click the icons on the screen to access these documents. Education has been required since October 1, 2000 for all investigators who are submitting applications to the National Institute of Health for grants or contracts, or those who are receiving new or non-competing awards for research involving human participants. Training documentation evidence is required before funds are awarded for competing applications or contract proposals involving human participants. Documentation of training must be provided by investigators and all individuals identified as key personnel. Module 2, Adverse Events and Unanticipated Problems. At the end of this module, an individual should be able to define adverse events, AEs, serious adverse events, SAEs, and unanticipated adverse device effects, UADEs, and understand the difference between serious and severe adverse events, and be able to define unanticipated problems. Adverse events. An adverse event is defined as any untoward or unfavorable medical occurrence in a clinical research study participant, including any abnormal sign such as abnormal physical exam or laboratory finding, symptom, or disease, temporally associated with the participant's involvement in the research, whether or not considered related to participation in the research. Please visit the OHRP Unanticipated Problems Involving Risks and Adverse Events Guidance. Adverse events are collected to ensure the safety of participants enrolled in the clinical research study, and to determine the safety profile of an intervention. An adverse event may be a new symptom or sign such as a rash or headache, a psychological condition, an example being a depressed mood, a laboratory test finding which could be something like elevated blood glucose. An adverse event may be a development of a new condition or disease, or even an increase in the severity or frequency of a pre-existing symptom or condition, such as increased pain when walking. So what is the difference between adverse events and pre-existing conditions? An adverse event is any event not present during baseline or the pre-intervention period, or any event that is present at baseline but which increases in frequency and/or severity during a study. A pre-existing condition is all conditions that a participant had at baseline before an intervention is administered. How does one distinguish an adverse event from a pre-existing condition? At the baseline visit, all conditions, including their level of severity or intensity, should be documented for each study participant. This will help assess whether the conditions reported during a study are adverse events or pre-existing conditions. A serious adverse event is any adverse event that results in death, is life-threatening or places the participant at an immediate risk of death from the event as it's occurred, requires or prolongs hospitalization, defined as admission to hospital for more than 24 hours, causes persistent or significant disability or incapacity, results in congenital anomalies or birth defects, or is an important medical event. Important medical events are those that may not be immediately life-threatening, but are clearly of major clinical significance. These are a few terms that are used to help define serious adverse events. Life-threatening means that in the view of the investigator, the participant was placed at an immediate risk of death from the event as it occurred. Disability is defined as substantial disruption of a person's ability to conduct normal life functions. An important medical event is any other event that jeopardized the health of the participant and required medical or surgical intervention to prevent one of the other outcomes defining a serious adverse event. The terms serious and severe are often confused. However, the severity of an event is not synonymous with its seriousness. Serious is used when an outcome of an event happens as defined on the last two slides. Severe is used when the intensity of an event is classified as mild, moderate, or severe. Here are some examples to help differentiate between the two terms. A mild chest pain which results in a hospitalization is a serious adverse event. A severe rash resolving on its own is not likely to be a serious adverse event. A severe headache is not necessarily a serious adverse event. When an event is considered a mild event, the event is easily tolerated, and it's a minor irritant causing no loss of time from normal activities. A mild event does not require therapy or a medical evaluation, signs and symptoms are transient. When an event is considered moderate in severity, the event introduces a low level of inconvenience or concern and may interfere with daily activities, but is usually improved by simple therapeutic measures. A moderate event may cause some interference with functioning. When an event is considered severe, it is an event that interrupts normal daily activities and generally requires systemic drug therapy or other treatment. A severe event is usually incapacitating. What is the difference between an expected and an unexpected adverse event? When an adverse event is unexpected, the nature or severity of it is not consistent with information about the condition under study or intervention in the protocol, consent form, product brochure, or investigator brochure. When an adverse event is expected, the event is known to be associated with the intervention or condition under the study. An adverse event is any unwanted medical occurrence in a participant. And an adverse device effect is any device-related adverse event. ISO DIS 14155 Clinical Investigations of Medical Devices in Humans, Good Clinical Practices, 2008, defines a serious adverse device effect as one that, just like any serious adverse event, results in hospitalization, permanent impairment, death, or other sequelae. In the device world, not all adverse events are reportable. Instead, the investigator makes the decision as to whether a given adverse event is device-related or not. If so, it is called an adverse device effect. Think of cause and effect, and only adverse device effects are recordable and reportable. All unanticipated device effects are serious adverse effects, but not all serious adverse effects are unanticipated device effects. An unanticipated adverse device effect is any serious adverse effect on health or safety or any life-threatening problem or death caused by, or associated with, a device, if that effect, problem, or death of frequency, specificity, or severity of which has not previously been identified in the investigational plan or application, or any other unanticipated serious problem associated with a device that relates to the rights, safety, or welfare of participants. Unanticipated problems. An unanticipated problem is any incident, experience, or outcome that meets all of the following criteria. It is unexpected, in terms of nature, severity, or frequency, given the research procedures in approved protocol and informed consent form, and the characteristics of the study population. An unanticipated problem is also related or possibly related to participation in the research. An unanticipated problem suggests that the research places participants or others at a greater risk of harm, including physical, psychological, economic, or social harm, than was previously known or recognized. All adverse events are not necessarily unanticipated problems. All unanticipated problems are not necessarily adverse events. Some events may be both. An example of an unanticipated problem is if a nutritional supplement used as an intervention in a study is found to contain contaminants, through random testing. Another example of an unanticipated problem is if a pharmacy technician dispensed a dose of an experimental agent that was 10 times higher than what is dictated by the approved protocol. Module 3, Safety Monitoring Reporting Requirements. At the end of this module, participants should be able to understand reporting requirements for adverse events, serious adverse events, unanticipated adverse device effects, and unanticipated problems. All adverse events experienced by study participants must be reported. Reporting procedures for adverse events must be described in the Data and Safety Monitoring Plan. The Adverse Event Form provides a template for collecting adverse event information. What details should be included in adverse event reporting? 1 should include start date and time, whether the symptom or condition has resolved, and the date of the resolution, any action taken, such as if the participant saw a primary care physician or took a medication to alleviate a symptom. 1 should also include severity, relatedness to study intervention, and any indication of whether the event was serious. How does one know if an event is definitely related? If the adverse event is clearly related to the intervention, and it is temporally associated with intervention, follows a known or expected response pattern, and improves when stopping the intervention. An event is possibly related if the adverse event follows a reasonable temporal association with the intervention, but could have been produced by a number of other factors. An adverse event is not related if it is clear that it is not related to the intervention, or study procedures, and another cause is most plausible, or if the event is not temporally consistent with the intervention and thus is not biologically possible. The principal investigator must report all serious adverse events to the NIA and Safety Monitoring Body, which is the Data and Safety Monitoring Board or Safety Officer. The principal investigator must also report to the IRB. In a multi-site study, the coordinating center must notify all other site investigators of the event so the investigators can notify their IRBs. The principal investigator must also report all serious adverse events to the Food and Drug Administration, if the study is under investigational new drug application, 21 Code of Federal Regulation 312.64. The principal investigator must also report all unanticipated adverse device effects to the Food and Drug Administration, if the study is under investigational new drug application 21 Code of Federal Regulation 812.3. The MedDRA is the medical dictionary for regulatory activities. It is an international terminology developed by the International Conference on Harmonization and is employed for adverse event and serious adverse event coding by the pharmaceutical industry, medical product industry, and regulatory agencies throughout the world. There are different adverse event coding requirements for different types of trials. For single-site trials, investigators should use their institutional resources or else common terminology criteria for adverse events, version 5.0, which is available at NCI's website. These tools will assist you in coding events using MedDRA. For coding adverse events in single-site trials, the NIA can provide assistance for the DSMB and safety officer reports. When coding adverse events for multi-center trials, the coordinating center should code using MedDRA. Unanticipated problem reporting. Investigator institutions should maintain the written procedures to ensure prompt reporting of any unanticipated problem. Reporting procedures must include a corrective plan and measures to prevent reoccurrence. Reports of unanticipated problems should be forwarded to OHRP, the IRB and NIA, usually within 2 weeks of the event. Module 4, Safety Monitoring and Oversight, DSMB and Safety Officers. At the end of this module, participants should be able to understand the determinants, types and importance of safety monitoring, identify the roles of the Data and Safety Monitoring Board or Safety Officer, independent safety monitoring bodies, and understand the purpose of site monitoring visits. Safety monitoring is an ongoing review of participants' health and well-being to ensure study procedures and/or the intervention are not placing an individual at unjustified risk by enrolling in the study. Principles of safety monitoring. All intervention studies require oversight and monitoring to ensure the safety of participants and the validity and integrity of the data. Monitoring should be commensurate with risks and with the size and complexity of the trials. An independent safety monitoring body should be established if required. Independent safety monitoring is required for all clinical trials and studies with more than minimal risk. Safety monitoring can be approved by the Institutional Review Board, or approved by NIH through a safety officer or the Data and Safety Monitoring Board. IRB stands for Institutional Review Board. IRB is any board, committee, or other group formally designated by an institution to review biomedical research involving human subjects, and to approve the initiation of, and conduct periodic review of such research. IRB is required for all human subject studies. Who makes up the independent safety monitoring body? There is the advisory to the NIA director. There is also the safety officer. The safety officer is an independent individual, often a clinician, who performs data and safety monitoring activities in low-risk, single-site clinical studies. Finally, the body is made up with the Data and Safety Monitoring Board, otherwise known as the DSMB. The DSMB is an independent group of clinical trial experts, biostatisticians, bioethicists, and clinicians knowledgeable about the disease and treatment under study. The DSMB provides oversight to Phase 3 clinical trials, and Phase 2 studies in which the degree of risk associated with the procedures or interventions is more than minimal. The DSMB meets on a regular schedule, usually twice a year. They will hold additional meetings as needed. The DSMB meetings are attended by the members of the DSMB, the Principal Investigator and designated study staff, and the NIA program staff. The DSMB has several responsibilities. The board is responsible to review the research protocol, informed consent documents, and plans for data safety and monitoring. They are also responsible for advising the NIA on readiness of study staff to begin recruitment. They evaluate the progress of the trial, data quality and timeliness, recruitment and participation. Also, the DSMB is responsible to consider factors external to the study, such as relevant new scientific or therapeutic developments that may have an impact on the safety of the participants, or the ethics of the trial. The DSMB will make recommendations and assist in the resolution of problems reported by the Principal Investigator. They will make recommendations to the NIA concerning continuation, termination or other modifications of the trial based on the observed beneficial or adverse effects of the intervention. If appropriate, the DSMB will review interim analyses in accordance with stopping rules, defined in the Data and Safety Monitoring Plan. Finally, The board is responsible for ensuring the confidentiality of the study data and the results of monitoring. The DSMB Charter describes the board's responsibilities, procedures, and operations. DSMB reports templates are provided in the NIA toolbox. Site monitoring visits ensure that the rights and well-being of human participants are protected, the reported trial data are accurate, complete, and verifiable, and that the trial is conducted in compliance with the current protocol, as well as with GCP and all other applicable guidelines and regulatory requirements. Coordinating centers for large multicenter clinical trials may have site monitoring visits built into their work scope. NIA may conduct on-site data assessments through a third party to assure protocol compliance and data integrity. Module 5, Regulatory Requirements and Responsibilities of Principal Investigators. At the end of this module, participants should be able to identify the regulatory responsibilities of a principal investigator, and understand the safety reporting requirements of a principal investigator. The investigator is expected to comply with the study protocol, safety reporting requirements, such as the Common Rule and Good Clinical Practice Guidelines. The investigator is also expected to comply with reporting requirements for monitoring and auditing, informed consent, as well as the Institutional Review Board. A principal investigator's responsibilities are to obtain informed consent, comply with protocol, recruit participants in a timely fashion, maintain a list of qualified study staff, permit monitoring or auditing of study. A principal investigator is also responsible to follow NIH and NIA procedures and guidelines, comply with GCP, provide updates to IRB, maintain records and reports, and perform safety monitoring and reporting. The investigator responsibilities to study volunteers are to provide respectful care, ensure privacy, confidentiality and safety, ensure adequate understanding of study and its risks, and to respect individuals' right to refuse participation in the study. Module 6, Data and Safety Monitoring Plan. At the end of this module, participants should be able to understand the purpose and content of a data and safety monitoring plan. All clinical trials require study-specific monitoring procedures to ensure participant safety and data integrity. The DSMP must be described in an NIH grant application. The scope of the plan is commensurate with risks associated with the study procedures and intervention, the number of sites, and target population. The Data and Safety Monitoring Plan should outline safety monitoring procedures that investigators and study staff will follow during the clinical trial. It should also describe study risks, potential adverse events and serious adverse events, plans for capturing and reporting these events, and how the safety of study participants will be monitored. The DSMP should include the following sections: trial safety, which entails potential risks and benefits for participants, adverse event and serious adverse event definitions, plans for collection and reporting, and protection against study risks. It should also include interim analysis, if any, and data and safety monitoring. Data and Safety Monitoring Section. This section describes the type and frequency of data and safety monitoring, the content of data and safety monitoring reports, DSMB or safety officer expertise and affiliation, protection of confidentiality, and DSMB or safety officer responsibilities. For reference, here is the DSMP template and guidelines, and the DSMP checklist. Module 7, National Institutes of Health and National Institute on Aging Policies and the Responsibilities of NIA Staff. At the end of this module, participants should be able to describe policies and guidance document compliance, and NIA staff safety oversight responsibilities. For your reference, here is DHHS Regulations on Protection of Human Subjects, Policies and Guidelines for Clinical Research Conduct, Policies and Guidelines for Inclusion of Women and Minorities, and the NIH Policy on Data and Safety Monitoring. For reference, here is the Guidance on Safety and Data Monitoring for Phases 1 and 2 trials, Guidance on Reporting Adverse Events to IRBs for NIH-supported multicenter clinical trials, and NIA's Policies for Human Intervention Studies. The NIA's Clinical Research Study Investigators Toolbox includes numerous templates, information materials, guidelines, and regulations. The NIA program official, overseeing clinical trials, will review all individual serious adverse event reports, as they are submitted by the study staff, and all summary safety reports and listings of individual events in preparation for the DSMB meetings or safety officer's review. The NIA program official will discuss findings with the immediate supervisor and division director, inform the DSMB or a safety officer about the findings, ensure that the DSMB reviews a safety concern and addresses it in their recommendations, request and review a safety officer's report, discussing a safety concern and recommendations addressing it, and ensure that the DSMB, or a safety officer includes determination of significance of adverse safety findings in their recommendations to NIA Director. Learning check. You will now be asked to complete 10 questions regarding the NIA Safety Training course. Who determines the type of oversight a study may require? A. Principal Investigator, B. National Institute on Aging Program Official, C. Safety Officer, D. All of the above, E. None of the above. Which of the following are not required to take good clinical practice training? A. Study participants, B. Contractors, C. Principal Investigator, D. Study Review Group, E. None of the above, all are required. When a physician uses an innovative strategy that is in his or her opinion best for the individual, this is an example of A. Clinical practice, B. Clinical research, C. Therapeutic misconception, D. All of the above, E. None of the above. An adverse event that is not evident during baseline could be A. A pre-existing condition, B. An untoward medical event, C. A serious adverse event, D. Unexpected, E. B, C, and D are all correct. What should be included in the trial safety section of a data and safety monitoring plan? A. DSMB or safety officer expertise and affiliation, B. Protection of confidentiality, C. AE and SAE collection and reporting, D. DSMB or safety officer responsibilities, E. None of the above. Upon the occurrence of a serious adverse event, it is the responsibility of the principal investigator to contact A. Data Safety Monitoring Board or Safety Officer, B. Institutional Review Board, C. National Institute on Aging, D. All of the above, E. None of the above. Which of the following statements is most true regarding serious adverse events? A. All serious adverse events are indicated as serious on an adverse event form. B. All adverse events are reported on serious adverse event forms. C. If a serious adverse event is reported to the principal investigator within 24 hours of occurrence, it does not need to be reported in the adverse event form. D. If a serious adverse event is reported to the principal investigator within 24 hours of occurrence, it does not need to be included in the Data Safety Monitoring Board report. E. If the serious adverse event is reported to the principal investigator within 24 hours of occurrence, it does not need a follow-up by a detailed, written serious adverse event report. Who is responsible for determining the relationship to studied drug when an adverse event is reported? A. Study coordinator, B. Monitor, C. Investigator, D. Institutional Review Board. Which of the following is not a purpose of a site monitoring visit? A. To verify the rights and well-being of human participants are protected, B. To verify that reported trial data are accurate, complete, and verifiable, C. To verify the trial is conducted in compliance with the currently approved protocol, D. All of the above are purposes for site monitoring visits. Individuals agreeing to enroll in a clinical trial should be informed that they may withdraw consent and decline to participate in the study at any time, before or after signing the consent document, up until their participation in the study is completed. True or false? Thank you for completing the NIA Safety Training course.